In this lecture deck, we're going to cover factor markets. So these are going to be the markets that determine the price for an input like capital or labor, as well as the amount purchased by producers. For this lecture, we're going to focus on labor, but I want you to keep in mind that capital and other inputs are also would fall under the category of factor markets, excuse me. Um, Inputs and other things that are used in the production process are going to be subject to the same type of analysis that we do for labor. Now, the labor market is one of the most important factor markets in most economies. About 60 to 70% of all the money spent on inputs is paid to workers. But there are a couple simplifying assumptions that we want to make explicit before we look at our model. The first is that all of our workers in this model are going to be identical, right? They're going to be homogeneous. This, of course, is an unrealistic assumption, right? We know that people are very different, even when they've had similar experiences, similar education. The skills that they develop, the strengths that they have are going to vary quite a bit. But just for our purposes here, we're going to keep it simple. And then once we have a handle on the model, it'll hopefully be clear how we can introduce this nuance of variation between laborers. Our second assumption is that the firm is going to choose how much amount of labor they want to hire in the short run. Now, when we consider the firm's demand for labor, it's going to capture all of the firms in a market that would like to hire workers. Okay, so for our market demand for labor, we're going to look at first the demand from a single firm and then aggregate up. Okay. When firms are deciding how much labor to hire, they face a fundamental trade-off in that they're only going to be willing to pay the worker how much they expect to gain from that person's work, right? So they're going to consider first how productive the worker is. They're going to consider their marginal productivity of labor. And then they're going to consider how much they can sell the good that the worker produces for, right? So if I'm hiring someone to make lattes for me, I'm going to consider how much coffee they can make in a given hour, and then how much I can sell those lattes for, and that's going to determine how much I'm willing to pay each worker and how many workers I end up hiring. Okay. So with these two considerations, we can get what is at the what is fundamentally underlying how much labor a firm hires, and that's the marginal revenue product of labor. It's going to be for the firm the total benefit of adding one additional worker to their workforce. And we get that value by multiplying the productivity of the worker times that price at which the good is sold, right? And again, this relationship between marginal revenue and price, that identity that I've been using, keep in mind that that is specific to the perfectly competitive market. If instead we were talking about a monopoly market, marginal revenue would actually be below the price. Okay, so let's do an example here. So let's say that we have a firm and the last worker they hire can produce 5 more units of their good, and the firm is able to sell those units at $100 each. And we want to find the marginal revenue product of labor for that last worker. So we want to remember marginal product of labor is equal to the marginal product of labor times the marginal revenue. The marginal product we were given was 5, and we're going to multiply that by marginal revenue, which is the price, the $100. So that gets us that the marginal revenue product of labor for this last worker hired is $500. Okay, and that's what we see. All right, so we're going to stop here, and then in the next video, we'll get into looking at demand for labor, the firm's demand for labor, in the context of the perfectly competitive market.